I've seen buyers lose their dream Manhattan apartment, and not because they couldn't afford it, but because they made one of these 5 critical mistakes. And the worst part, many of these mistakes are made before they even put the offer in. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 5 most common pitfalls that many first-time New York City buyers fall into, and more importantly, how to avoid these mistakes so that you don't lose your deposit, your time, or your sanity. And if you stick around until the end of this video, I'm going to talk about the single most important document that you need to prepare before you make an offer, and many buyers don't even know about this until it's too late, and it will certainly put you ahead of much of the competition out there. But first, I'm Dewey. I'm your New York City real estate resource. If you're serious about buying in Manhattan, make sure that you hit the like, subscribe, and notification button so that you can stay up to date on all the strategies I'm sharing about the New York City real estate market. And let's get started. Mistake number 1 is waiting too long to get pre-approved for a mortgage. So here's what happens. You find the perfect apartment, you fall in love with it, you're ready to make an offer, and the agent asks you, do you have your pre-approval letter? And you say, no, I was thinking about getting around to that this week. And guess what? In Manhattan, you've already probably lost that apartment. In Manhattan, which is a very competitive market, selling agents and sellers want to see that you are a serious buyer and you are pre-qualified by a bank in New York City that works on co-ops and condos on a regular basis. That's extremely important. They want to see that your finances are aligned and ready to go to be able to purchase this unit. Otherwise, they simply will not take you seriously. But here's the thing, getting pre-approved isn't just about getting the letter. It's about finding problems that may arise and solving them before you even go apartment shopping. Perhaps your credit score isn't exactly where it needs to be, and we can work on that. Perhaps you have a very large deposit that needs to be accounted for, and maybe some time needs to pass so it doesn't show on the statements, or we can account for it on those statements. Or maybe you're self-employed, you own your own business, your finances and income are very complicated, and we need some time to really structure that well enough to get you the mortgage. There are many, many things to consider, not just for the mortgage, but for the offer. And by doing this pre-approval early, it will allow you to diagnose some of those issues and provide solutions for them. If you wait to do this when you find an apartment, you're going to be scrambling, and it's gonna add some time to your process. And in the meantime, other buyers who are prepared and have a great buyer's agent on their side are gonna step ahead of you in that offer. So here's the fix. Get pre-approved now, even 3 to 6 months ahead of when you start looking for an apartment. Talk to a great mortgage broker who specializes in Manhattan real estate. They're going to go over your finances. They're going to tell you exactly what you can afford, because there are some special things that you need to consider, because we have maintenance payment and mortgage payments, common charges, property taxes on condos. All those things have to be considered in your pre-approval. So by going over this early, you're going to be ready when the time comes to find that dream apartment. Mistake number 2 is underestimating the cash you need to close. Now, I've covered this in many of my previous videos, but it's worth repeating because this is where many buyers get stuck. So many buyers think, well, I know that I need 20% down to buy in Manhattan, and on an $850,000 apartment, that's $170,000 down. I've got that, good to go. Not so fast. You need to consider all the other closing costs that change according to what the purchase price is on the apartment. You need to budget around $20,000 to $25,000 for a co-op, and maybe even more for a condo. But the real surprise beyond the closing costs is post-close liquidity and debt-to-income ratio. So first, let's talk about that debt-to-income ratio. Many people are surprised to find out that co-ops want to see a debt-to-income ratio that's including your costs for the apartment, your projected mortgage payment, your projected maintenance and common charges. All of that goes into your projected debt-to-income ratio, or DTI, and they definitely want to see it below 30%, really below 28% is better, and many want to see it below 25%. Now keep in mind that many banks will give you a mortgage all the way up to maybe 36%, but that's not what counts. What counts here are the co-op and condo board rules. So even though your bank may say they'll finance you up to 36%, a co-op wants to see that magic number below 28%, preferably below 25%. So if your debt to income ratio doesn't quite work, that's something that we can diagnose early on and work toward a solution on. Now the other thing is post-close liquidity. Most co-ops want to see at least 2 years worth of maintenance and mortgage payments sitting in the bank at the time of closing. This is not part of your down payment. It is not part of your closing costs. It is totally separate. So what you do with that cash after closing is completely up to you. No one's going to come and check and make sure that you have money sitting in the bank. But for closing, on a co-op, you're going to need that post-close liquidity. So for an $850,000 apartment, if your mortgage and your maintenance is approximately $5,800 a month, that's about $140,000 in post-close liquidity that you need to be sitting around in a bank or in liquid assets. So for that $850,000 apartment, you're not just looking at the down payment requirement, you're not just looking at the closing costs, you're looking at all the cash required, and depending on the building, that could be up to about $330,000 that you need in liquid assets to be able to close. So here's the fix for that. Sit down with your buyer's agent. This is why a good buyer's agent is critical. Sit down with your financial advisor, go over the numbers. Remember, every building is different. So your buying agent is going to be able to help you understand the range and get a good general idea of what you're looking at and what the cash is going to be required to close. If you don't have that, then you can start a savings plan with your financial advisor and prepare. And that may take some time, but knowing this up front is so much more important so that you can plan for next year or 2 or 3 or 5 years in the future and be really prepared to get that dream home. Okay, so if you're finding this video helpful so far, do me a favor and hit the like, subscribe, and notification button, and leave a comment down below about which mistake is surprising you the most. I do read every comment on this channel, and those comments help me craft content that's going to best serve you. All right, let's keep going. Mistake number 3 is not understanding the differences between co-ops and condos and how that's going to affect your buying process. Here's the reality. About 80% of the entire inventory in Manhattan are co-ops, not condos. So generally speaking, a first-time buyer, you're probably going to be considering co-ops along with condos, and certainly co-ops are more economical, they're more affordable, have less closing costs, so they are very appealing for first-time buyers. But co-ops and condos are completely different in how they operate and are completely different buying processes. When you buy a condo, you're buying real property, just like buying a house. And that's why you have common charges for the building, but you also have your personal property taxes on that real property. The approval process is much more straightforward than a co-op. You do have a condo board application. Some people think that you don't have to go through that. You do have to do an application. When I say an application, it's actually an extensive financial package that has lots of moving pieces to it. But the difference is that the condo board only issues what's called a right of first refusal, meaning that they don't want to purchase that unit that you're buying, and that is rarely exercised. Also with a condo, you can certainly rent out the unit, you can use it as an investment unit, you can purchase in an LLC for privacy, all sorts of things that give you a lot of flexibility when buying a condo. Closing costs are usually higher on a condo, and usually condos are about 15% more expensive than co-ops, so you need to take all of that into consideration when you're buying in New York City. When you buy a co-op, you're not buying real property in the traditional real estate sense. You're buying shares in a shareholder-owned corporation that owns the building. You do not receive a deed. You receive a share certificate, and you receive a proprietary lease assigned to the unit that allows you to live there as the sole occupant. But because this corporation is a private company, here's the big deal. Co-op boards have sole discretion over all the rules of the building and also the buying process, the requirements, the criteria, and who can purchase in that building. That means that you do have to go through the board application process, which is extensive. It's an extensive financial package. It's reference letters. It's a lot of forms. It can be up to 1,000 pages or more in terms of the material that you have to provide. It's very similar to providing material for your mortgage, but it's actually even more extensive. The board must approve that application and then they grant you an interview. Those interviews take on very different forms, but you must have the interview. And of course, a co-op board can reject any application and any shareholder as long as it's not on the basis of discrimination under New York's fair housing laws. Co-ops also have much stricter rules. Many don't allow subletting at all. Some have subletting rules like 2 out of 5, meaning that you have to live there for 2 years and then you can rent for 3 years total. Many don't allow you to buy in LLCs or trusts. They don't allow pied-à-terres, meaning second residences, but many buildings do allow these different variations. So you need to work with your agent to understand exactly what your goals are, what a co-op building allows, what their criteria is, and put all of that together to make sure that your offer for this dream apartment that you found in a co-op is going to go through all of these steps. In addition, the down payment can vary from building to building because the board sets that criteria. So even though as a general rule of thumb we say 20%, it can be 30% or even up to 40% that a particular building wants to see down to guarantee that you are going to be a very strong shareholder in the building. So here's the fix for this issue. Before you fall in love with an apartment, sit down with your buyer's agent and really go through the criteria for that building. Make sure that you're going to meet all that criteria and that all of the building's rules really do fit for what you're looking for. If you're not willing to go through the application process and the interview, then you really do need to focus solely on the condo process. But just understand that with condos, you're going to be paying a premium to buy in that building. Mistake number 4 is skipping or not taking the financial review or due diligence period seriously. So many buyers focus so much on the apartment, the layout, and how much they love and what's going to work that they forget that they're actually needing to look at the building's finances and the financial health on the whole. It's extremely important, and if you skip this section or don't put much emphasis on this section, you're really going to have some issues in the future. You have to remember that you're not just buying an apartment, you're buying into a corporation if you're buying a co-op, or into a building with a homeowners association that runs the entire building. So if the entire building is having financial issues, you are going to have financial issues as well. So what are some key things that you should be looking for? Well, first we talk about the reserve fund. A building really is only as healthy as the reserve fund, because if something happens, for example, if the boiler breaks or something major in the building needs repair, where do those funds come from? Well, they are either going to have to come from an assessment that is put on the shareholders or the owners, a monthly charge in addition to your common charges, or they're going to come out of the reserves for the building. A corporation is only as healthy as the money that they have to reinvest in that corporation, correct? That makes sense. It is the same for the buildings in New York City. They need to have at least 3 to 6 months of operating expenses, if not more, in the reserve fund. So make sure that during the due diligence period, you take a look with your attorney at the reserve fund and understand the building's financial health. Now, secondly, I mentioned assessments. You do need to check and see if there are any assessments currently on the building or any assessments coming up, and what are the nature of those assessments. Is it a one-time charge because there's a giant project, repairs on the facade or something like that going on, or is it an ongoing assessment? And then beyond that, what's the reason for that ongoing assessment? Because there could be tax implications that the board is considering. So not all assessments are created equally, but you do need to check and make sure, are there any assessments going on now or in the future for the building? And finally, always check to see if there's any pending litigation against the building, why it's being sued, how long it's been going on. Litigation in New York City can drag on for years and is very expensive, so it can deplete the reserve funds for a building. So make sure you check and see. And fourth, and this is particularly true for condos, check and see what the ratio is between renters and primary residences. The reason for this is if the building is approaching having renters at about 40% or greater, many mortgage institutions won't lend to the building. It becomes too great of a risk. So you want to make sure that while the building can allow renters and investment properties, you want to make sure that the ratio is such to where the building can still be financed. Okay, so here's the fix for all of this. Before you sign a contract in New York City, you go through what's called the due diligence period. And New York is an attorney state, so you must have a real estate attorney. During that due diligence period, which generally takes 1 to 2 weeks, the two attorneys are going to be working on the draft of the contract, but more importantly, your buyer attorney is going to receive all of the due diligence information on the building. That's going to include several years of financial audited statements. There's going to be minutes from the board meetings. There's going to be operating agreements. There's going to be a ton of information that they are going to review, which is why you need a great attorney who focuses on Manhattan real estate. They know exactly what red flags to look for and know how to sort through all of this paperwork in an efficient manner. They know what's important and what may not be important when it comes to the viability and financial health of a building. Now, some buyers are so excited and want to just get through the process as quickly as possible, and they urge their attorneys just to skip all of this. That is a huge mistake. You make the offer, take the time to let the attorney do the appropriate amount of due diligence, and then you sign the contract when you are secure enough to know that the building you're buying into is the right building and has good financials and is in good health. Then you sign that contract. Mistake number 5, and this is really about the co-op buying process, is not preparing a good board application package and not doing well at the board interview. Now, this is the one that can break people's hearts because you have found the perfect apartment, and this buying process can go on for 3 months with a co-op before you can get to closing, and you get to the interview and that's the final step, and then you get rejected. That is a lot of money wasted, and that is a lot of your time wasted. And these are the kinds of stories that people hear about co-ops and the nightmare buying process around co-ops in New York City. But 9 times out of 10, it is because you did not prepare your application correctly and did not take the interview seriously. Board applications are extensive and they must be prepared well. There are a lot of ins and outs to preparing a good board package, and your buying agent should know how to do this. This is part of their job, and this is part of why they're earning a significant commission on the deal, because the selling agent is not responsible for helping a buyer through that board application. And if the board application is not well prepared, then the board will reject the shareholder and not even grant a board interview. So you must be careful, and you must have the right person guiding you through all of those steps. When it comes to the actual interview, I always advise my clients to treat this like a job interview. This is very rarely, if ever, roll out the red carpet, here's the milk and cookies, and welcome to the community. The board is checking to make sure you are going to be a responsible, financially viable shareholder coming into this corporation. So it can be much more serious than what many people think. With that said, here are the most common mistakes that people make when it comes to the board interview. Mistake number 5, this is being arrogant or overly confident. A board simply doesn't want to see a shareholder that they feel like are going to cause problems and be arrogant. So you're going to need to be approachable, you're going to be nice and very professional during the interview, and you'll be fine. Mistake number 4 is not knowing your own board application. As I mentioned, these applications are extensive, and you you need to know the information that you have provided, and you need to be able to talk about that logically. So if they ask questions about your employment, if they ask questions about the referral letters or your finances, you need to be able to answer that without pausing, without being insecure, without saying, give me a moment, I have to look through this. There are ways that you can train yourself to be ready for this interview, but one of the key ways is reviewing your financial application and understanding what questions they may ask about your board application. Mistake number 3 is bad-mouthing your current landlord or bad-mouthing your board if you're coming from another co-op. Who wants to hear that? And certainly who wants to hear that coming from a potential new shareholder, because you may be bringing all sorts of baggage with you and may apply that to your new board or your new super. So keep all of that information to yourself. If you have complaints, do not air them out during the interview, but you'd be very surprised at how many people do that. Now, if the board does suggest something, for example, maybe a board member says, oh, I've heard about that building's a terrible building, you will simply say something to the nature, well, I think many buildings have their issues, but I'm so excited to be able to become here and be a shareholder here, and not engage in the negativity. That is to your best interest in the board interview. Mistake number 2 is bringing up all the extensive renovations you want to make as soon as you move into the apartment. This is a huge mistake. Now, it's not that co-ops do not allow renovations, but it makes a board very nervous when that's the focus and you start talking about all the ways you want to change the apartment. You have to understand that co-ops have approval process over any renovations that are made. It is a process that you must go through, discussions you must have with the board, and not all renovations are allowed. So if you start bringing up renovations, that shows that you may not be quite savvy in understanding how the renovation process works in co-ops, and also it may give the impression that you don't care. So it is best to save that discussion for after you've been approved and after you've closed, and then start approaching the board about renovations in the way that the board requires you to approach renovations. That could be talking to the property manager, that could be submitting architectural drawings, that could be submitting forms that the board has, but you must be respectful and go through that process. So do not bring that up during the board interview. It makes boards very nervous. And finally, mistake number 1 is not being prepared for this question. Why do you want to live in this building? Now, I mentioned that we're not rolling out the red carpet and doing the milk and cookies and welcome to the neighborhood thing. However, you are going to be a neighbor to all of these shareholders in the building, and they want to understand why you want to live there. Many people will just say something like, this apartment was a good deal and I'm ready to move. Not good enough. They want to understand why you want to live in the neighborhood, why you want to live in that particular building. They want to know that you're excited to come into the building, and they want to know that you're going to be a good neighbor and enjoy living there. Otherwise, why allow a shareholder into the building? So be prepared to answer that question and show how much you love this building, love the neighborhood, and really want to be a part of the community. So here's the fix for all of that. You need to sit down with your buyer's agent. You need to make sure that your board application is immaculately done and submitted. And then you need to practice for your interview. If your buying agent doesn't have any tips, well, seek someone out that does. Certainly, as a buyer's agent, I offer all of my clients a lot of tips on how to pass the interview, as well as do practice sessions. If they're not going to be comfortable talking, we'll do a mock interview. Those kinds of things are very important. So make sure that as a fix to all of these potential issues, that you take every step you can to put your best foot forward in front of the co-op board. All right, I promised up front that I was going to talk about the single most important document that many buyers don't know about, and that is your personal financial statement. We have a form in New York City called the Real Estate Board of New York Financial Statement. It is a spreadsheet that breaks down all of your income, your assets, your debt to income ratio, your projected expenses, and gives some information about what your financial profile really looks like. You absolutely need to submit this form with an offer, particularly on a co-op, or else the offer just simply will not be taken seriously. As a selling agent, I've received many offers that don't have the REBNY financial statement. I can't even present it to my seller as of yet because I need to know, and I need to help my seller understand if this person will qualify past all the board requirements. And the only way we can do that is by looking at your finances. Now, this feels incredibly invasive, and it feels like it's a lot of private information that you're giving to someone that you may or may not know. But you should do this up front with your buyer's agent, so the buyer agent really understands your financial criteria and can again make recommendations as to which buildings will work for you. It does no one any good to go and fall in love with an apartment and then to fill out that REBNY financial statement on the back end only to find out that your financial criteria doesn't match the criteria of the board in that building, and you simply cannot purchase there. The boards do not change their financial criteria. While there may be some flexibility in those different kinds of criteria in terms of what the board may or may not put emphasis on, they don't generally change their rules for any one specific shareholder. So you need to fill out this REBNY financial statement. You need to share that with your buyer's agent. You need to sit and have a discussion about your finances, and that way you know that if you do visit a building and fall in love with an apartment, chances are you're going to qualify as a shareholder to be able to purchase into that building. If your buyer's agent doesn't discuss this with you pretty early on in the process, even though again it may be uncomfortable for you to reveal all of your finances to a person you don't know, then that buyer's agent may not be a great agent for you to work with. You need to have that discussion up front with the buyer's agent that you are engaging so that everyone understands exactly how much you can afford and what kind of financial criteria you can pass in any building. So there you have it. Those are the top 5 mistakes that most New York City first-time buyers make and how to avoid them. And trust me, if you follow this advice with your buyer's agent, you are going to be ahead of 90% of the competition that's out there. Now, if you want access to some of this information, click in the link below to download my buyer's cheat sheet. It has a lot of good information and tips. And if you're ready to start your buying journey in Manhattan and want an agent that's going to really hold your hand throughout this entire process, give you the truth, no BS, and make sure that your deal goes as smoothly as possible in this complicated market, my contact information is in the description below, and I would love to help you find your Manhattan dream home. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.